When Emily moved into her new apartment, she was eager to start fresh. The building was old but charming, nestled in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and quaint little shops. It seemed like the perfect place to escape the noise and chaos of the city. The first thing Emily noticed was how quiet her neighbors were. Her apartment sat between two others. On one side lived an elderly woman, and on the other, a couple with a young child. She'd only seen them briefly while moving in. Nods exchanged in the hallway, quick glances, nothing more. They were the kind of neighbors who kept to themselves, which suited Emily just fine. As the days passed, Emily couldn't help but notice just how silent her neighbors were. She never heard a TV or radio, no conversations, not even footsteps. It was as if the apartments next to hers were vacant. Occasionally, she'd catch a glimpse of them through the crack in their doorways, a shadow moving behind a curtain, a figure passing by. But there was no sound. It wasn't until one night, after she'd been living there for a few weeks, that Emily began hearing the strange noises. It was just past midnight when it started, a soft tapping sound, like fingernails drumming against a wall. It was faint, almost rhythmic, coming from the apartment on her left, where the elderly woman lived. She thought little of it at first, assuming it was the old woman moving around, perhaps tapping her cane or fiddling with something. But the tapping continued, growing louder and more erratic as the minutes passed. Annoyed, Emily knocked on the wall, hoping to signal to her neighbor to quiet down. The tapping stopped immediately. Relieved, she settled back into bed, but her comfort was short-lived. A new sound emerged, this time from the apartment on her right. It was soft at first, like whispering, too quiet to make out, but unmistakably there. The whispers came in bursts, like hurried conversations, muffled as if spoken through a thick wall. Curious and unnerved, Emily pressed her ear against the wall. The voices continued, but no words were clear, just whispers, overlapping and hissing, rising in intensity. She knocked again, hoping to signal to her neighbors, but the whispers stopped, leaving an unsettling silence. The next day, Emily decided to check in with her neighbors. She knocked on the elderly woman's door but got no response. She knocked again, louder this time, and still nothing. Finally, she tried the couple's door on the right. After several minutes, the door creaked open just a crack. A woman stood behind it, her face partially hidden in shadow. She looked pale, her eyes wide and glassy. "Hi, I live next door," Emily said, forcing a smile. "I just wanted to check in. I heard some noise last night and wanted to make sure everything was okay." The woman stared at her for a moment before slowly shaking her head. Without a word, she closed the door. Emily stood there, unsettled, but decided to let it go. That night, the noises returned, this time louder and more disturbing. The tapping was faster, more frantic, and the whispers had turned into unintelligible murmurs, layered with a strange, wet sound, like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. Emily felt her skin crawl. It was as if the entire building was alive, with strange, unearthly sounds. Unable to take it any longer, Emily called the building manager. She explained the situation, the noises, the strange neighbors, the eerie silence during the day. The manager seemed puzzled. "That's impossible," he said. "No one's lived in those apartments for years." Emily froze. "What do you mean? I've seen them. I've talked to them." The manager sighed. "I'm sorry, but those apartments have been vacant since the last tenants passed away. You must be mistaken." Terrified, Emily rushed back to her apartment, her mind racing. She couldn't understand what was happening. How could the apartments be empty? She had seen the people, spoken to them. As night fell once again, the noises returned, more intense than ever before. The tapping now came from both sides, the whispers merging into an unsettling chorus of voices, speaking words she couldn't understand. Emily huddled in her bed, covering her ears, trying to drown out the sounds, but they only grew louder, as if the walls themselves were closing in on her. In a panic, Emily burst out of her apartment and ran to the building manager's office. She demanded to see the records of the apartments next to hers. Reluctantly, the manager handed her the files. As she flipped through them, her heart sank. The elderly woman had died in her sleep 2 years ago. The couple next door had perished in a tragic accident, their child disappearing without a trace. Their apartments had been sealed ever since. Emily dropped the papers, her hands trembling. The silent neighbors weren't neighbors at all. They were ghosts. Be sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos. It was the day before Halloween, and as usual, Allison had procrastinated on finding a costume. All the stores were picked clean, and she was starting to worry she'd be stuck wearing last year's lame outfit. That's when she spotted it. A strange, dimly lit shop at the end of the street she hadn't noticed before. The old crooked sign above the door read, "Morgana's Mystical Attire." Curious, she stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and incense, and racks of extravagant costumes lined the walls, velvet cloaks, ornate masks, and glittering gowns. Behind the counter stood an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a cryptic smile. "Looking for something special, dear?" the woman asked, her voice like a creaking door. Allison explained her dilemma, and the old woman nodded thoughtfully before disappearing into the back room. Moments later, she returned with a box, dusty and worn, like it had been hidden away for years. "This is just what you need," the woman said, her smile widening as she opened the lid to reveal a costume unlike any Allison had seen before. It was a Victorian-style dress, deep crimson with intricate lace and shimmering black accents. Despite its age, the fabric felt cool and soft under her fingers. "It's perfect," Allison breathed, already imagining how stunning she'd look at the party. The woman's eyes gleamed. "Oh, it's more than perfect, dear. But once you put it on, you mustn't take it off until the night is over." Allison laughed, brushing off the strange warning as the shopkeeper's attempt to build mystery. She paid for the costume and hurried home, eager to try it on. That night, as she slipped into the dress, something odd happened. The moment it touched her skin, Allison felt a shiver run down her spine. The fabric seemed to mold to her body, fitting perfectly, almost too perfectly. But it looked amazing, and the eerie vibe only added to the costume's allure. Her reflection in the mirror was mesmerizing. She felt powerful, mysterious, like she'd stepped out of another time. At the party, everyone was in awe. Compliments flew, and Allison basked in the attention. But as the night wore on, she started feeling different. It wasn't just the usual excitement or buzz from the party. It was as if the costume was affecting her thoughts. Her movements became more graceful, but more rigid, too, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. Strange whispers echoed in her mind, voices she couldn't understand. Then the strange things started happening. Whenever Allison tried to leave the room, people would stare at her, their eyes wide with fear, as though she had done something horrible. She caught her reflection in a mirror and gasped. The woman staring back at her wasn't her anymore. Her face was pale and hollow, her eyes sunken and dark, like something from a nightmare. Panicked, she rushed to the bathroom and tried to pull the dress off, but it wouldn't budge. The fabric clung to her like a second skin, tightening every time she tried to tear it away. She could feel it now, something moving beneath the material, like the dress itself was alive. Desperate, Allison fled the party and ran home. She locked herself in her room and frantically searched for scissors or anything to cut through the cursed costume. But no matter what she did, it was useless. The dress seemed to be growing tighter, merging with her body, binding her to its cursed history. Suddenly the voices became clear, whispering tales of the souls who had worn the costume before her. They had been drawn to its beauty, just like she was. But once they put it on, they were trapped, forced to live out the lives of those who had died wearing it. Allison looked into the mirror again, and this time she didn't see herself at all. A ghostly figure stared back at her, a woman from a time long gone, dressed in the very same gown. The whispers filled her mind, drowning her thoughts, until she couldn't remember her own name. The last thing Allison saw before her reflection disappeared entirely was the faint smile of the ghost, taking her place. The next morning, Morgana's shop was gone, and the old sign hanging above the door read simply, "For rent." The haunted costume had claimed its next victim, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to come looking for something special. Be sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos. On a rocky cliff at the edge of the world stood Black Rock Lighthouse. For decades, its beacon had guided ships through the perilous waters below. Few people ever visited the lighthouse, save for the rare shipwreck survivor or a curious traveler. Most avoided it, for it was said to be cursed, shrouded in dark legend. The keeper, an old man named Thomas Gray, had lived there for as long as anyone could remember, a solitary figure whose only company was the crashing waves and the howling winds. But Thomas harbored a secret, one that had haunted him for years. The town below whispered about him. Some said he had gone mad from isolation. Others believed he was hiding something much darker. No one knew the truth, but one thing was certain. The light never went out, no matter the weather. And yet, no one had ever seen Thomas leave the lighthouse. One stormy night, a young woman named Evelyn, desperate to uncover the truth, decided to visit Black Rock. Her brother, a fisherman, had vanished at sea a year ago, and rumors swirled that he had been lured to his doom by the lighthouse. Determined to find answers, Evelyn made the treacherous journey to confront the keeper. As she approached the towering structure, the winds seemed to scream in her ears, the sea roaring violently against the jagged rocks below. The light from the tower flashed intermittently, cutting through the darkness like a silent warning. Evelyn knocked on the heavy door, her heart pounding in her chest. After a long moment, it creaked open, revealing the old keeper standing in the shadows. His pale eyes studied her warily. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped, his voice like the wind through dead trees. "I need to know the truth," Evelyn insisted. "What happened to my brother?" Thomas hesitated, his weathered face contorting with guilt. He stepped aside, allowing her inside. The lighthouse was as cold and unwelcoming as its keeper. The air was damp, and the walls were lined with nautical charts, lanterns, and old yellowed books. But what caught Evelyn's attention was a large, locked chest in the corner of the room, bound in chains. It radiated an unnatural energy, as if something inside was calling to her. "Your brother isn't the only one who's disappeared," Thomas admitted, as he closed the door behind her. "And the lighthouse, it's not what you think." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" Thomas's gaze shifted to the chest. "There's a curse on this place, the light. It doesn't just guide ships. It calls to something ancient, something from beneath the sea. Every few years, it demands a sacrifice." Evelyn's eyes widened in horror. "You're telling me that my brother was taken by this thing, and you did nothing to stop it?" I tried. Thomas's voice cracked with emotion. But the light. It has a power of its own. I've been trapped here for decades, bound to it. I'm its servant, cursed to feed it the souls it craves. Evelyn felt a cold wave of dread wash over her. What's in the chest? Thomas's expression darkened. It holds the key to ending the curse, but opening it will release something far worse. A loud crash of thunder shook the lighthouse, and the beacon above flickered. Thomas hurried to the window, peering out at the storm. It's awake, he muttered. It knows you're here. Evelyn's heart raced. She didn't know what to believe, but she couldn't leave without trying to save her brother's soul. She took a step toward the chest, but Thomas grabbed her arm. If you open that, there's no going back. It's not just your life at risk. It's everyone. Evelyn pulled free from his grasp, determination in her eyes. I have to try. With trembling hands, she approached the chest. The chains rattled as she touched them, and the air seemed to grow colder. As she worked to unlock it, she could feel the presence of something watching her, something ancient and malevolent, waiting for her to make a mistake. Finally, the last chain fell away, and the chest creaked open. Inside there was no treasure, no weapon, just a single, glowing orb, pulsating with a sickly green light. As Evelyn reached for it, a deafening roar echoed from the sea, shaking the lighthouse to its core. Thomas shouted, "It's too late!" But Evelyn was already grasping the orb. The light within it flared to life, filling the room with a blinding glow. In that moment, she felt it. The presence beneath the sea, the ancient being that had claimed her brother and so many others. Its hunger was endless, and now it had been awakened. The ground trembled, and from the depths of the ocean, something enormous began to rise, its shadow towering over the lighthouse. Evelyn's heart pounded in terror as she realized the magnitude of what she had unleashed. But as the creature approached, the light from the orb grew stronger, pushing back the darkness. Evelyn felt a surge of power, and for a brief moment she saw a vision, her brother, trapped in the depths, reaching out to her. With a scream, she hurled the orb into the sea. The creature let out a final ear-splitting roar before vanishing beneath the waves, dragging the cursed light with it. The lighthouse's beacon flickered one last time and went out. In the silence that followed, Thomas collapsed to the ground, free from the curse at last. Evelyn stood at the edge of the cliff, staring out at the calm sea. She knew her brother was gone, but his soul, and the souls of many others, were finally at peace. The lighthouse would stand empty from that day forward, its terrible secret buried beneath the waves, but the whispers of its dark past would continue, passed down through generations, warning all who dared to listen. The lighthouse keeper's secret had finally been revealed. Be sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos.